Okay, in terms of the stuff, as always, just bad news. Someday good news, but not today. Deadlines seem to have been all along. Quizzes part 1, deadline September 18th. Exam 1, quizzes part 2, deadline October 16th. Exam 2, quizzes part 3, deadline November 13th. Exam 3, exam 4, quizzes part 4, deadline to 5 December 4th. And exam number 5, deadline to 5 is December 11th at noon. And the rest of these are 11th to 9:59 p.m. For the paper, if you want to do a draft, deadline is November 16th. If you want plus 5 extra bonus credit, November 18th. For full credit, November 25th. And for half, December 4th. Before pressing on to the new stuff, any stuff about any previous stuff or stuff to be that needs more stuff. Okay, so last time we were looking at some of the more methods, and as I mentioned, these are things that you don't have to use in your paper, but things that could prove useful. Because each one of these is essentially a template for arguing, an ethical issue. And for each one I went through like how to use the method, and then how to respond to it. What is something you could use in your objection reply? But again, you don't have to use any of these, and you certainly don't have to use all of them because there's a whole bunch. If you used all of them, you have a really big paper. Okay, next one we turn to is what's called the argument by definition. And it's a general method, even though we'll look at how to use it in the context of ethics. It can be applied outside of ethics as well. And back in the ancient days of 2 weeks ago, I mentioned we talked about conceptual issues, essentially about definitions. I said that we'd look at, when we get to argument by definition, how to resolve those. How do you tell whether a definition is good or bad? How do you resolve a dispute over concepts? And as foretold by that ancient prophecy, lo, the argument by definition. So here's how you use the method. Step 1, you provide the definition of whatever it is you wish to define. Step 2, so you define, we'll take a kind of a concrete example. Suppose we are defining, say, cheating in a relationship. And we want to include like virtual cheating. We might say that cheating involves, this won't be a complete definition, but we might say it involves, say, emotional infidelity, or people, being involved emotionally with others in ways that they're only supposed to be involved in with the person they're committed to. And so you define it very badly that way. Then we could say that virtual cheating has those qualities. So cheating is, A, B, and C. Virtual cheating has these qualities, and we conclude that if cheating is defined as A, B, and C, and virtual cheating has those qualities, A, B, and C, therefore virtual cheating would be cheating. And then an argument by definition. So again, the steps are: step 1, present your definition; step 2, apply it to whatever it is you wish to apply it to, and then draw the appropriate conclusion. So what would be some other examples where you might just use this in terms of moral issues? Well, one again is like the example of virtual cheating. If you want to argue that virtual cheating is cheating, one way to do that is by argument by definition. And you want to define cheating in a way that would include virtual cheating. Another example would be, let's take another issue that's kind of an older issue now, but at one point was, a cutting edge issue, is the copying of, software, movies, music. Is that theft? And one way to address that is to define theft. If you think that it is theft, you'd want your definition of theft to cover copying movies, books, etc. If you believe that, copying that stuff isn't theft, you'd want your definition of theft to exclude that. For example, kind of traditional theft was, taking a physical object. And theft is bad. The traditional view is that if I take your tablet, it harms you because you're denied that tablet. You don't have your tablet anymore. But if I, copy someone's movie and don't, erase the movie from their, erase their movie, it would seem that I haven't stolen something from them because they still have the movie. So it would not be, copying would not be theft, some people argue. Another example where definitions also matter would be euthanasia, also youth in America. One thing that sort of, one way to look at the issue is, if you pull the plug on a person, you might say that, well, that could be, you know, if not murder, at least some form of like homicide. But if it's a case where the person is gone, then you might say, well, if there are cases where the person is not there, pulling the plug wouldn't be killing the person because they actually died a long time ago. It's just the body still hanging out there. And so what you have to do is have a definition of person, under which someone who has no brain activity, for example, would not be considered a person. Or another example where the definition of person matters would be the moral issue of abortion. Defining person this way, at what point does the fetus become a person, and then draw the appropriate conclusion. And a final example of a person, there was a case, I think, you know, not super recently, but within I think a year or two, where they were trying to sue on behalf of whales, killer whales and so forth that are in captivity, claiming that the whales' rights are being violated, they were being enslaved. And people have argued that the whales are people and are entitled to those rights. And so if you wanted to make that argument, you'd have to have a definition of person that would include whales. If you think the idea of whales as people is BS, or whale blubber, then you'd want to, or WB, I guess that's whale blubber, then you'd want to have a definition that excludes those. And so those would be examples where you might use argument by definition. Now, a good question might be, well, does that mean I can just define anything whichever way I want and just like win by definition? Well, no. Here's why. In order to win by definition, so to speak, you've got to have a good definition. So how do you tell when you get a good definition? Because the idea is you just can't define something and expect people to accept it. You've got to present a good definition and be able to sort of back that up. Now on the plus side, you need to show your definition is, you know, clear, coherent, accurate, intuitively plausible, you know, all that basic good stuff. But most importantly, there are some things that you definitely need to avoid. And these are all basically fatal defects in definitions. If a definition has got these, the definition is doomed, or defi-doomed, or whale blubber, as the case may be. So what are these conditions? Well, these are actually lifted from our good dead friend Socrates. But he's like really dead, so sorry, Soc. One thing you want to avoid is a definition that is circular. A circular definition, as the name sort of indicates, runs you in a circle. That the definition includes the term to be defined. Now there are really sort of like tight circles, and there are really broader circles. One that would be like a really, really obviously circular, something like this. If someone defines ethics as the study of ethics, well, that, if you don't know what ethics is, the study, you know, if I don't know what ethics is, it'd be like saying Gragra is the study of Gragra. I'd like, well, I got the study part, but I don't know what the rest means. Or if someone defines, you know, to use an example outside of ethics, if someone says art is any product of the fine arts, that runs in a circle. Because again, if you don't know what art is, telling people it's fine arts not going to help. So you don't want your definition to be circular. There can be others that can be like, you know, they can be circular less directly. But the idea is you don't want circularity. Because a definition like that, although technically, like, I guess, correct, art is art, and perhaps art is dead, but it doesn't help you in your definition. Now, definitions also need to avoid some classic lacks of clarity. For example, some problems include ambiguity, which is something where the terms have two or more meanings. It's not clear what is meant. There's also vagueness, in which it's not precise enough for the purpose at hand. But to get to the two sort of classics that everyone has to talk about when they talk about definitions, there are these two problems. definitions being too narrow or too broad, or actually, weirdly enough, both. Now, to explain that, I will begin with two crappy metaphors, or analogies. First one is this. Think of like an exclusive club with bouncers. And an exclusive club, the job of the bouncers is to do what? Or the person with the clipboard at the door. Their job is
to monitor who come in.
yeah, to keep out the wrong people and only let in the right people. And the clipboard person or bouncer is doing her job if all the right people get into the club and all the people who don't belong are kept out. To use another crappy analogy, think of the firewall that you should have on your computer. It's pretty much standard now. They used to have to like buy them separately, but now they're pretty much built in. You always want that on. And the reason why is what the firewall is supposed to do is let in stuff you want to come in, namely like your email, your web pages, and whatever, updates, etc. And you want it to keep out stuff you don't want getting into your computer, spyware, malware, etc. And so a firewall is doing its job is keeping out the stuff you don't want in there and letting in the stuff that should be in there. Now, how does this metaphor, analogies connect to this? Well, if a definition is too narrow, it's like a bouncer that keeps out people that should be in there. Or it's like a firewall that keeps you from checking your email or getting the web pages you want. So a definition that's too narrow leaves out or excludes stuff that should be in there. For example, suppose someone defines a person as a human being. And that would be too narrow. Why? Well, there could very well be, suppose we'll make it even more specific. We'll go with, our species, with Homo sapiens. And we say only Homo sapiens are people. Person is Homo sapiens is person. Now, the reason why that'd be too narrow is because there could be, if we want to be like, kind of sci-fi-ish, there could be living creatures that are not human. If you've seen movies like Star Wars and Star Trek and, so forth, or any sci-fi show, they have, fictional races like Vulcans and Klingons and Kzinti and stuff that aren't humans, but we'd say they're still people. Vulcans are people too. Or if you want to go, also with sci-fi with non-living things, we might accept that, if you see the movie Ex Machina, you might accept that Ava, the android, is intelligent. Or like on Star Trek The Next Generation, like Data, the android, that they're people. Or if you see The Matrix, the Oracle, the Architect, Agent Smith, you might accept that they're people too. And so we might say that Homo sapiens is too narrow. Now if we want to go back to the past, we know that there were non-Homo sapiens, namely like Neanderthals, for example, that were probably almost certainly people, but were not Homo sapiens. So you don't have to go sci-fi, you can just go to the past, to things that were not this species, our species, but were people. So you probably say that's just saying Homo sapiens is people, people is Homo sapiens, too narrow. These are stuff that should be in there. Now, too broad lets in too much. It's like a bouncer that says, screw the list, everyone in the club. Drinks are on someone else. Now, to go, example one that's too broad would be, suppose we took as person, we took anything with human genes. Well, that would be too broad because could there be things with human genes that aren't people? Well, think of like your skin cells. The human genes, are they people? Are you millions of people? No, we think like if I do this, kill some cells, I'm not committing murder or suicide. I mean, they're my cells, but they contain human DNA, but we don't think that they're separately human. Similarly, cancer. If you have cancer, your cancer contains human genes. But people don't say, no, don't murder the cancer. We're all for cancer murder. We don't think that they're people. And so that would be too broad, lets in too much. But also, interestingly, boringly enough, is also too narrow, because it lets in things that shouldn't be in there, but also keeps out things that perhaps should be, things that don't have human genes that are still people. So kind of the two main things are, if you want to get a definition that's just right, too narrow means it keeps out stuff that should be in there, which is bad. Too broad means it lets in too much, and the Goldilocks test, if it's just right, it lets in everything that should be in there and keeps out everything that shouldn't be in there. And most arguments about definitions focus on that. Is it letting in things that shouldn't be in there? Or is it keeping out things that should be allowed in there? I mean, to take one, obvious controversial definition is the definition of marriage. Now, when marriage is defined between, between a man and a woman, there are those who would say that's too narrow. That it should include, man and man, woman and woman, and man and woman. And so they might say that's too narrow of a definition. Other people may say, take the same, allowing, defining marriage as between consenting adults. Other people might think that is way too broad. It lets in too much. And so the battle over the definition of marriage is basically over those two things. Is the definition that's being presented too narrow, keeping out things that should be considered marriage, or is it too broad, letting in things that should not be in there? And so people are fighting over same-sex marriage. Part of it is a battle over definition. What is marriage? How much should be in there, and how much should be kept out? So that's how the argument by definition works and how to assess your concepts. Now, when building a definition, those are the questions you'd ask. Is my definition too narrow, too broad, or just right? And the odds are the definition will be imperfect, but the idea is to make it like at least as good as it can be. So how does one respond to an argument by definition? If you're on the receiving end, or because of the paper, you got to raise an objection. What is a way to object to an argument by definition? Well, there are the following ways. So, putting the sort of form back up again, essentially the form would be a definition of Y, let's say person, is properties A, B, and C, whatever the definition is. X, let's say, whales have those qualities. Therefore, a whale is a person. So suppose you don't buy that whales are people. How could you respond to that? Well, or suppose you're raising an objection in your own paper. Well, one option is to go after and criticize the definition. Say that it's too narrow, or try to show that it's too narrow or too broad by arguing against that. For example, if we define a person as any living creature, you'd probably say, well, that's too broad, because if we go by any living creature, that means that bacteria are people. And that seems mistaken. The second thing you can do is you can argue that you can be found with the definition. You can say, yeah, I'm okay with the definition, but you might say that what's supposed to fit under the definition doesn't really have those properties. For example, suppose someone defines a person as in various ways, and it includes that they use language, not just like making sounds, but actual language. They can pass the Cartesian test, which we'll see later. Basically, can use language appropriately, talking. And suppose people say, well, whales talk. Well, one way to argue against that might be to say, well, they make noise, but they don't really talk. We know that they use sophisticated sounds, etc., but they don't seem to have a language. Therefore, they make noise, but they don't use language, so they're not people. A third option is to give a counter definition, to say, no, this definition is wrong, here's a better one. These things don't fit the definition, therefore it's wrong. For example, defining a person has like use of complex, sounds, a person says, well, that's a wrong definition. It needs to be not just complex sounds, but say true language. Or a person may reject the language thing. For example, someone may claim that like a fetus is a person, but fetuses don't use language, they don't talk. So a person might have an issue with the definition in various ways. Now, of course, to respond to the response, what you do is you'd argue the definition is to counter, say the definition is actually good, try to argue the thing actually fits the definition, or try to argue again in favor of the definition. So if you're using this in the paper, you might do like argue, like you might say, I'm going to define people as, blah, blah, blah. Whales are people, whales have these qualities, whales are people. Someone might object that whales don't really have this quality, but in response, here's why they have that, therefore the definition argument still works. So you get argument, objection, reply. Done. Before pressing on to more stuff, anything by argument by definition that needs more examples, meaningless gestures, or stuff. Okay. Now, next one is appeal to intuition. It's a pretty useful method, and if you like telling stories, if you have a good hand in fiction, it's actually a pretty good one to use. You could actually have fun, horrifyingly enough, doing ethics by telling a morality or immorality tale. Now, appeal to intuition, of course, involves appealing to our intuitions. What's an intuition? If you get one, you've had one for more than 4 hours, should you be worried?
Yes.
Probably. But what is an intuition?
It's like when, I don't know how to explain it. It's just a feeling.
Yeah, it's kind of a feeling. You kind of think, the way you kind of think about something before you've really thought it through. It's kind of, people often say, like a gut reaction to things. And intuitions are used, not surprisingly, quite a bit in ethics. One way to look at it is, in philosophy, just like science, etc., begins with intuitions. You have kind of an idea. I think that's wrong, or I think that's how space works. And then you try to build from there. Also, interestingly, boringly enough, people often test, as we'll see, we talk about moral theories and principles, they test them against our intuitions. And same with definitions. These things have to either match our intuitions, they have to sort of seem to make sense, or if they don't, we've got to show why we should accept them anyways. Because things that are counterintuitive, we need reasons to accept. Like, why should I, this seems weird, why should I believe that? So for example, if someone claimed that consuming more calories would make you lose weight, you'd probably say, well, that's counterintuitive. I'm going to need some proof. Whereas if someone said eating less food will help you lose weight, you'd say, yeah, that's intuitive. That makes sense. So how do you work in appeal to intuition? Well, appeal to intuition is kind of a blend of persuasion and argumentation. The goal of persuasion is to make people feel the way you want them to feel, so they believe the way you want them to believe. And persuasion has the same relation to truth as taste has to nutrition, namely none whatsoever. Because you can persuade people of things that are totally not true. The goal of argumentation, at least philosophically, is to establish something as true. Provide premises to support a conclusion, to show logically it should be accepted as true. Now, of course, you can use arguments to try to persuade, but if you're trying to persuade people, probably the worst thing you can do, well, not the worst thing you can do, because I guess you can punch them in the face or something, or shoot them, but one thing that's not very effective is argumentation. If you take the critical thinking class, one thing you'll see is the best way to persuade is either bad logic or no logic at all, which makes me sad every day, but that's life. Now, so appeals to intuition are kind of a blend of persuasion, trying to make you feel a certain way so you believe a certain way, and also argumentation, trying to give actual support. Now, essentially, there are 3 main versions of appeal to intuition. The super simple, the story method, and the story method plus. Super simple one is this. And it's really, it probably really shouldn't be considered an argument, but I use it all the time myself, so here we go. You just use the word intuitively. Intuitively, comma, blah, blah, blah. So you might say intuitively, throwing kittens and wood chippers is wrong. And the idea is that to the degree that the audience shares your intuition, they would find that persuasive. Now, of course, that's really, in fact, you might not even be inclined to say it's really an argument because you're just saying the word intuitively, which is really easy to do. Now, the second one is a story method. What you do is, it's usually sometimes called like an intuition pump. The idea is essentially you're trying to tell a story, a just so tale, so your audience says, yes, that seems plausible. I'll accept that. And it's more persuasion than argument, because it rests on telling the story. For example, suppose I want to argue or try to convince people to choose evil over good. I could tell a immorality tale to this effect. Imagine, if you will, two up-and-coming young software developers. You know, they're starting, we'll use a social media group. They're trying to come up with the latest and greatest new social media, like Twitter Book, or FaceSpace, or Insta Weasel, something. And so you've got Bad Bill, who has his name implied is bad. And then you have Sweet Polly Purebred, who, as her name implies, she's sweet, and she likes bread. Now, Sweet Polly, of course, in this tale is a person who is good. She doesn't lie, she doesn't, cheat, steal, etc. She'll always do what is morally right. So she pays her workers fairly. She doesn't cut corners. She doesn't try to send jobs overseas just to save money. She doesn't bribe or try to bend the laws to her favor. She has a very developed sense of justice. She always does what she regards as morally correct. In contrast, we have Bad Bill, who is, as I mentioned, is bad. So he's evil. He'll do whatever it takes to succeed. Now, Sweet Polly, of course, being good, can only do good stuff, because one of the downsides of being good is you can only do good. Bad Bill, however, is bad. He can do whatever it takes to succeed. So if Bad Bill, if giving money to an orphanage will get him good PR, which will sell more, get his site recognized and make more money, he'd do that. If he needed to harvest the organs of orphans to fuel his social media, he'd do that too. Whatever it takes. So Bad Bill does whatever it takes. Whenever something needs to be done, he does it, regardless of its morality or immorality. Sweet Polly, of course, is limited by goodness. She cannot do whatever it takes. So what happens? Well, flash forward a few years, there is Bad Bill. Super successful. He's smart and capable, but also utterly immoral. He does whatever, but he's not stupid. He does whatever it takes to succeed. And there he is, sitting in his, giant office building, perhaps built by Donald Trump, and he's wondering which of his mistresses or the wife that he'll visit this weekend. Will he take the private jet to Paris, the SpaceX rocket to Japan? Will he take his hovercraft to Manhattan? Or will he just walk down, a couple floors, to his in-building mistress? But what does he see? He gazes out the window. Who is that? Oh, his old college friend, Sweet Polly. She's living in the dumpster behind 7-Eleven because her company failed. Living on, melted Slurpees and discarded 7-Eleven hot dogs. She's mad. Because her business went out of business because she couldn't compete against Bad Bill. And Bad Bill laughs. Ha ha ha. The laugh of the unjust as he heads off to his rocket ship to Japan. Now, of course, in this story, Bad Bill wins. Why? Why is it? Because I say he wins. I'm writing the story. It turns out however I want it to turn out. Which is kind of the weak point of, when you're writing a story as an argument, it goes whatever way you want it to go. I could have done it differently. I could have had Sweet Polly triumph. Bad Bill's immorality gets the worst. People can't trust him. He, tries to bribe the wrong people. He comes to a bad end and fails. And he's in the dumpster. And Sweet Polly is beloved and loved and becomes, a great, business leader and ends up with her own TED Talk, talking and wins the prize for like awesomeness. That's a prize, right? Well, it should be. It should totally be. It should totally be a prize. They should have the awesome awards. Why not? You know, why not? Now, what you can do, of course, to make the argument, you know, an actual argument, is use the story plus method. So I could say, of course, in this immorality tale, Bill triumphs because I say so. So let us see why Bill would in fact triumph. Let us consider the following analogy. Imagine you're trying to do a job, and you decide you're only going to use half the tools in the toolbox. And someone else is doing the job, and they're going to use all the tools. Who's probably going to do a better job? Yeah, get all the tools. You can, you know, if you say, well, I'm not going to use hammers, well, good luck pounding those nails in with that screwdriver. Or if you decide you're not going to use screwdrivers, good luck, you know, cutting that wood with, you know, or good luck, you know, putting in screws with that saw. And so if someone's got a full toolbox, they get all the tools. They can use whatever it takes to succeed. Now, a person who's good is also limited. They can only do things that are good. And there are clearly cases in which doing stuff that would be evil, lying, bribing, cheating, bending the rules, exploiting people, would be very advantageous. Now, of course, Bill can do good stuff too, but whenever being bad is advantageous, he can do that. So Sweet Polly is operating with at best, half a toolbox. She can only do the good stuff, whereas Bad Bill can do it all. So Bad Bill will try. So that'd be an appeal to intuition with story. Oh, I forgot to say intuitively, evil is a better choice than good. So it's got all the parts. Got the word intuitively in there, it's got this just so story, and then it's got the sort of this is why the story is something you should accept as an argument. And this is a good method if you like to, you know, tell stories, because you can create your own, you know, morality or immorality tale, and then lay out why that story should be convincing. A shorter version would be something like this. Imagine, and you may wonder, like, why are the rocks there? Well, here's one. Every slide is an illustration that is relevant to an example. And of course, I spared no expense. I have the finest Microsoft clip art quality, Trump quality. It's like Trump Tower of you know, graphics. But anyways, imagine you're at the mall. Are malls still a thing? Are they still open?
Yeah.
They're supposed to be dying. And I think the Tallahassee Mall is like kind of like not mall anymore.
No, they're not.
And I remember like when it was starting to like lose stores. I was walking down and it was like, there's like a long dark corridor, the Radio Shack at the end, but it's all dark, and I was like, I'm not gonna go down there because I've seen that movie. And I know what happens. And those poor people at Radio Shack are trapped there. They can't leave because they've seen the movie too. And they're probably like chewing batteries or something to stay alive. Those poor people. Or maybe they're using remote control cars, you know, sending them down to pick up food and bring it back. But imagine you're at a mall that is still malling, and there's a kid yelling, you know, I want an Xbox One, I want, you know, Halo 5. And the mother says, little Billy, you've been stubborn and disobedient. Reaches in her purse, takes out a rock, and bam, down goes Billy. Now, intuitively, we'd say, even though, you know, the Bible says stubborn and disobedient children should be stoned in public, intuitively, do we think that children should be stoned to death for being sassy?
No.
No, that would be horrible. Intuitively think that. So that'd be sort of like a story, you know, with the intuitively put in there. Now, suppose you're on the receiving end of an appeal to intuition, or you use one in your paper, and you want to, you know, respond back to that with an objection. Well, here's how to do that. One option is you can question the intuition. You can, you know, basically try to argue against it being intuitive. You know, one way to do this would be kind of a counter-intuition. You could say, intuitively, although stoning children seems unappealing, intuitively one should follow the commands of God. So kind of a counter-intuition. Another option is to not engage with intuitions, but just go right to a different sort of argument. Perhaps one of the other methods we're looking at. For example, suppose someone, you know, gives the argument from intuition against stoning disobedient children. But a person might reply in the following way. Now, hear me out on this. This will sound a little crazy, but You wait until the end before judging. Now, imagine, if you will, you're at a movie. You shucked out, say 20 or 30 bucks to see an IMAX 3D movie, and you're waiting to see it. And get your popcorn. It's like Star Wars. You're all excited to get your popcorn and stuff, and you're ready to go. And then suddenly there's a kid behind you screaming and kicking your chair, so you can't pay attention to the movie. And of course you can't strangle them because, they're kids. And so you're like, oh no, I paid all this money for this movie and no one's silencing this kid. But suddenly, the mother says, little Billy, you have been stubborn and disobedient. She reaches in and the rock of justice comes out and bam, Billy's down. And you can watch Star Wars in peace. Hear the Wookiee, doing the Wookiee sound, the sound of the lightsabers and so forth, the sound of J.J. Abrams and Disney cashing in all that money. Cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. Now, then suppose after the movie you're going shopping. And little Billy's down, so we'll go to little Sally. And little Sally's freaking out and yelling she wants an Xbox and, Halo 5. And, bumping into you, knocking you around, you can't make your purchase. But the mother takes out, boom, the rock of justice, and bam, little Sally's down. And so instead of dealing with all that noise and stuff, you can quietly make your purchase. And then you go out to a restaurant, same thing. Because I guess Billy and Sally are down, so I guess we'll have to go with Sam. Sam's, throwing food around, creating ruckus, ruining your evening. But the rock of justice comes out again. Sam's down. Peace ensues. Now, of course, this can apply elsewhere as well. For example, next time you're waiting in line. You're waiting and waiting, but the odds are the people in front of you, they are probably stubborn and disobedient children. And if they've been stoned in their youth, you'd be getting your food right now instead of waiting in line for your Starbucks. You wouldn't be waiting in line for your espresso chippo latte espresso coffee thing. You'd already have it. But instead, all these fools who should have been killed as kids for being stubborn and disobedient, they are between you and your Starbucks. Or take as a final example, parking. You better pull in a parking spot, close by the building your class is, some fool cut you off. Now clearly they were stubborn or disobedient, and if that had been a rule, the parents would have taken them out long ago, and you would have the spot that is rightfully yours. So, stone early and stone often for a better tomorrow. So that'd be an appeal to, a horrifying appeal to intuition. I said, don't judge me yet. Just think about it. Next time you're waiting in line, think about all those fools. They could be like, you could be getting your donuts or your latte or whatever, if all of those fools have been stoned as children. So consider that option. So that'd be responding to the appeal to intuition. You could tell another story or argue, in this case, against it. And that'd be, by the way, an appeal to consequences. There'd be so many beneficial consequences to stoning those disobedient children that it'd be totally worth it. Don't tell the dean I made that. Now we'll now turn to a fairly generic method. It's called applying moral principles. Now, this method is generic in the sense that it doesn't involve any particular principle. You can just plug in whatever one you want, so it's kind of a do-yourself template. It's kind of like Microsoft Word, when you doing say a resume, you can load up a resume template. And it says put name here, put work here, put stuff here. Now some of the ones to look at after this one are actually particular moral principles, like appeal to consequences, appeals to rights, appeals to rules. They're specific versions of applying moral principles, ones that are well established. And this is a generic one, so you can kind of make your own. It's kind of like make your own adventure, except not as fun. It doesn't involve flipping pages. But here's the method. Step one, present and defend the principle you wish to defend or wish to use. In this case, we're going with an athlete. Imagine you get an athlete who is this close to